What makes a video game good? It seems rare to even ask that question, but it's become oddly unclear over the years. The obvious answer would be that games should be fun, but if you ask Neil Druckmann, an influential and award-winning game director, he would probably disagree with you. Games are rapidly changing, and as game design evolves, it seems important that we understand what exactly makes a game good. Of course, game preference will always be subjective, and I think to an extent quality of a game is subjective as well. However, it's a vital part of being a human to recognize that you might not like something, but that thing may still have value or be of some substantial quality. The same, of course, is true of video games. So I want to be clear here that this is not an objective set of rules about what makes a game good. Rather, this is a contemplation of what makes a game work. There are many different answers, and video games are a very versatile medium, so this is just one response to a rapidly changing market. First off, let's look at what separates video games from any other storytelling medium. I talk more about this in my video on storytelling in video games, but let's make a short recap. Video games can be played in bite-sized pieces, so games can be expansive and deep without being overwhelming. Video games also have an unparalleled power to put you in the driver's seat and make you the decision maker. You don't have to watch the character, rather you get to engage with the world yourself. And finally, video games can go hours without dialogue, just relying on visual beauty and music to push you forward. If you ask me, the storytelling is fundamentally the most important aspect of modern game design. Don't get me wrong, I say this, but I still believe that games should primarily focus on the gameplay. What I mean is that the story is what gives the game context. Imagine a game like Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild revolutionized open-world game design with phenomenal gameplay mechanics and a satisfying gameplay loop. It also has fantastic environmental design. But still, the game would feel so much less engaging without a story holding it together. Nobody wants to run around a big open map just for the sake of running around a big open map. The story is what gives the player motivation to go out exploring. The story didn't need to be good, it just needed to exist. But we begin to hit a crossroad where things get confusing. If The Last of Us 2, or any other story-focused game, had a bad story, it would wholly devalue the game. But at the same time, we have games like Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze that don't make an effort at the same deep or complex stories. Rather, they focus on tight mechanics and gameplay. The Last of Us 2 is a somber game, hoping to instill some sobering emotion in the player, whereas Tropical Freeze is focused on fun. So is a good game a matter of the story they tell, or fun mechanics? If it's about stories, then Tropical Freeze is a failure. But if it's about fun, then The Last of Us 2, well, it's still alright at the expense of some expanded controversy. Well, I don't think there's a clear answer to this dilemma. Games naturally have multiple ways to entertain, so it's hard to put a fast rule and to determine what's good and what's bad. But as it is really vague. How can video games be a good storytelling medium if we don't know how stories affect the quality of the game? But maybe we're just looking at this all wrong. Maybe it's not about the story, but rather the way the story is told. Let's jump back to Breath of the Wild. If you ask a Zelda fan, the game's story was relatively disappointing and mediocre compared to other Zelda games. But still, this game is near universally considered a masterpiece. I think this has to do not with the story, but the storytelling. The setup of memories entices you to explore. It gives a purpose to your adventure and you have an excuse to run around the world. Unlike some open-world adventure games, where exploration is just a distraction from the main quest, exploration in Breath of the Wild is the main quest, and remains consistently relevant as you prepare to fight Ganon. So even though the story might be disappointing, the storytelling itself is effective and makes Breath of the Wild a masterpiece. With this in mind, let's look back at Super Mario Odyssey. People seem to write off this game's story as another in a line of generic Mario plots. But I disagree. There isn't a very deep story, but you're still given the context that pushes you forward. The game is a constant chase, and every time you get to a new kingdom, you have a focused linear journey through the kingdom to defeat the boss before the kingdom opens up. This does two things. It sets up the kingdoms as a relevant place with an epic short journey for Mario to take, and it familiarizes you with the kingdom so that when you beat the boss, you aren't totally lost as to where to go. Plus, with the constant chase, we get curveballs thrown at us, like the Ruined Kingdom, which sets up an epic boss fight. If we tear these games down to their roots, Super Mario Odyssey and The Last of Us 2 follow very similar structures. You're given enough story to push yourself to the next area and given an excuse to use the game's mechanics. The Last of Us 2 puts much of its identity in its story and characters, so naturally we see much more story-related content and grounded character moments. Super Mario Odyssey, on the other hand, focuses more on expanded movement mechanics, so naturally the story gives you an excuse to jump around these platforming jungle gyms and explore the new mechanics. But it's not just about the storytelling. Atmosphere is also crucial to making a game that feels very consistent. By shooting you into space, Super Mario Galaxy slows down and lets the vastness and somberness of space soak in. Some of these levels are extremely moody, while others feel relaxed, and others feel downright epic. This variety is part of the reason Super Mario Galaxy is so memorable. It stays with you long after the credits run. Unlike Odyssey, Super Mario Galaxy explores emotions other than just joy. And that gives the player a different connection to the game. It makes each level feel deeply important, and the game truly feels like a wonderful space adventure because of it. If you take the atmosphere out of a game, the game almost immediately feels much less exciting. Imagine Splatoon without the bold, chaotic atmosphere. Suddenly, the game loses so much of its identity. Even if all of the gameplay mechanics stayed in place, the game becomes so much less fun and relatively uninteresting. Imagine the Deku Tree from Ocarina of Time without the Deku Tree and that brooding atmosphere. How would the player possibly engage with it anymore? The dungeon just becomes a generic puzzle gauntlet, which will take players out of the game before being ultimately forgotten. Considering all the graphical improvements we've made since the arcade games, it seems like atmosphere can be better crafted in modern games. And while this is true, it's not a hard set rule. Visually stunning games like Godfall fail to create an atmosphere even half as enticing as the atmosphere in Ocarina of Time. Art style becomes extremely important then. Let's look at my favorite game, Stardew Valley. This game is very simple with its style. It doesn't use any crazy new visual technology or ray tracing or anything like that, and it doesn't need to. The game effectively creates an enticing world with such a simple style. Compare this to the new Harvest Moon games, which also use a simple art style, but one that ends up feeling cheap and artificial, but in reality, it's a more modern style than Stardew Valley. But that doesn't mean it's better. Even a game with good mechanics can be thought of negatively if the art style is unattractive. Compare an indie game like Grease that has an incredible art style to a blockbuster AAA game like Godfall. Despite being a low-budget game, Grease is far and away the more visually pleasing of the two. And of course, this just scratches the surface. Because while the game's atmosphere and storytelling can enhance the experience, the actual gameplay should be the primary focus of every game. The gameplay needs to be a set of fun mechanics. And by fun, I mean that the mechanics should be satisfying to pull off, like the mid-air dash in Celeste, which is just downright satisfying to pull off successfully. It feels good when you nail a series of jumps to get through a certain set of obstacles. Other mechanics, like the Slash Inspector Knight, which gives you incredible mobility, makes engaging with the world feel fun. The mechanic isn't necessarily hard to pull off, but every level is set up in a certain way to challenge your mastery of the mechanics. Super Mario Odyssey has a huge series of moves that allows you to travel through the world with fun platforming challenges. Without even using Cappy, you can long jump, crouch jump, ground pound jump, but then with Cappy, you can throw him and bounce off of him, you can throw him and dive into him, then throw him again and dive again. All these moves are so simple in themselves, but combining them allows you to move freely and conquer huge and epic jumps. And that's just the jumping. Not to mention the rolling or the captures, which further expands your set of tools. For platformers, it's crucial that the act of moving or jumping is, in itself, fun. Likewise, I think open world games should have fun movement mechanics as well, even if they're more grounded to those specific worlds. I know I keep bringing up Breath of the Wild, but it does so much so perfectly. The world is huge, and if all you could do is walk, covering large chunks of ground wouldn't be fun anymore. So in Breath of the Wild, you have the ability to climb and paraglide, and these two mechanics change the game. Instead of following the path from point A to point B, you can carve your own. It's fun to find your own way of getting somewhere, or whipping out your paraglider at the top of a cliff or a perfectly angled hill. You're enticed to explore because going out to explore is fun. On top of this, the game is built for you to experiment with the world, and so much of your experimentation will work, like burning the grass to get an updrift so you can soar up on your paraglider, or cutting a log to make a bridge. There are so many small things that you could do that are completely unnecessary, but because they exist, the world feels more natural. Then games like Grand Theft Auto introduce driving mechanics, which also serve to make getting from point A to point B more fun, especially if you've become wanted by the police that's keeping you at risk the whole time. But this leads to another big question. What about JRPGs? The games that seem to refuse to conform to modern game design philosophy, with some notable exceptions. Japanese role-playing games just kinda do their own thing. While they certainly embrace long, expansive storytelling that video games can do so well, they give you large, expansive worlds without nearly as many movement mechanics as other games. Rather, the primary focus is on careful, deep battle mechanics. JRPGs often bank on enemy variety to entice you to explore. If you go off the beaten path, you can find new monsters to fight. But then we reach another dilemma where some people just want to avoid excess combat. However, playing this way often just doesn't work, and it leaves you extremely underleveled. So more than any other video game genre, you have to play JRPGs in a very specific way in order to have fun. But combat isn't the only thing that entices you to explore. Well, not directly, at least. In games like Xenoblade, there are secret areas that have stunning visuals and oftentimes have rare items as well. The same is true if you push off the beaten path in Dragon Quest XI. Some of this exploration is derived from the world just being engaging, but having rare items or items needed for side quests means that by exploring you can become stronger and better equipped for battles in the future. Then, when you get to the next boss, you can be better prepared to take it on and dominate. This leaves less room for frustration, while also making you feel awesome when you overcome a tough boss because you put in the effort to get there. I think that's why JRPGs are so subjective. You really have to put a lot of time and effort in order to get the most out of it. Gameplay and storytelling have to work in tandem to make games engaging. Bad storytelling and you don't feel motivated to engage with the mechanics of the game. Bad gameplay and you begin to dread the moments between story beats. Either way, chances are any player would give up on the game. No, I've talked a lot about gameplay and storytelling, but of course, this has all ignored the actual level design. Good games not only need good mechanics and storytelling, but they also need well-constructed levels. A lot of times the player doesn't even know how much is going on in a given game that's making the experience work. I know I'm a broken record, but Breath of the Wild has some of the most innovative game design out there. The land of Hyrule is mountainous with so many hills, valleys, and cliffs. The world is incredibly detailed, but then you realize the hills are all carefully considered. Breath of the Wild has hills specifically placed to hide certain landmarks, and depending on how you go over a hill, or if you go around the hill, it will reveal a different landmark that will catch your eye. This means that the very way you decide to engage with a hill, a decision you might not even think about, fundamentally changes how you will engage with the world for the rest of the game. Doom creates areas that help you take best advantage of your entire bag of tricks, and Doom Eternal expands on this. Good game design gives you an excuse to use all of the game mechanics in clever ways that makes you feel brilliant, even if it was all carefully calculated beforehand. I think we dwell too much on the actual stories a game presents to determine its quality. Stories themselves are far more subjective than storytelling, and if we confuse this, we reach a disconnect between the player and the game. Video games are a varied medium, as I said before, but it is true. Despite everything I've talked about, games can break boundaries and succeed in new ways, and this is good for the industry. Strip away the movement mechanics and the open world land masses, and you have a game like Grease, an undeniably stunning game. Strip away the platforming, you might get a game like Life is Strange or Oxenfree. Video games can do so many different things, bring about different emotions, and provide a piece of entertainment with real depth and value. It's an art medium with countless possibilities. What we've seen so far is only a fraction of everything that can be done, and I'm so excited to see the future of the video game market because there's so many ways to innovate.